What's going on, everybody? Cleepus Tech here, coming back at you with another video. In this video, we're going to be doing a quick comparison between the Cricut Icon 4 and the TCL 30Z. Now before we go any further, as always, I do want to remind you to hit that subscribe button, and if you want to learn more about either phone individually, I will be linking to several other videos about them in the description, as well as some information about pricing, availability, and some of my favorite smartphone accessories. But with that being said, let's get into it. So with the Cricut Icon 4, we're getting a 6.5-inch IPS LCD display with a resolution of 720p, a PPI of 269, and a 20:9 aspect ratio. With the TCL 30Z, we're getting a 6.1-inch IPS LCD display with a 720p resolution, a PPI of 282, and an aspect ratio of 19.5:9. So in general, while neither phone really has the best display in the world, they are decent for what they are. But that being said, between the two, I would say the Cricut Icon 4 has a bit of an advantage. First of all, at 6.5 inches versus 6.1, the Cricut Icon 4 is clearly a bit larger. So if you're going to be on your phone a little bit more, this is going to be a nice thing. In addition to this, with the 20:9 aspect ratio versus 19.5:9, the Cricut Icon 4 has a slightly taller and more narrow form factor. So if you're doing something like watching a video in landscape mode, for example, you're going to get a more immersive experience. And with this kind of form factor, if you're doing something like browsing the web, using social media, stuff like that, you'll be able to fit more content on the screen without having to scroll as much. Now that being said, this difference isn't really that big a deal, and the TCL 30Z does have a pretty decent display too. And especially considering it is a TCL phone, TCL phones do tend to have above average image quality, and this phone is definitely no exception. That being said though, again, between the two, if you are going to be on your phone a little bit more, because of the size and dimensions, I feel like the Cricut Icon 4 does have a bit more of an advantage. Now for storage, both phones are getting 32GB of internal storage with microSD card expansion, so definitely not great here. Honestly, no matter what you're doing on your phone, unless it's really the absolute bare minimum, 32GB is going to fill up pretty quickly. So if you are a power user, and honestly, even if you just want to have any decent amount of apps, just keep in mind 32GB is probably not going to be a whole lot for you. And again, it will fill up pretty quickly. But that being said, keep in mind, phones like these are really more meant for the bare minimum. So if you're just doing a few basic activities and you only really need a couple apps, then even with 32GB, you should be at least okay. And again, both phones do have microSD card expansion too. So if you want to offload stuff like photos and videos, you always can. Now for security features, with the Cricut Icon 4, this phone does have Face Unlock, and it has a fingerprint scanner right here on the back. With the TCL 30Z, unfortunately, this phone does not have a fingerprint scanner, but it does have Face Unlock, so it's nice that we at least get one other option besides a pin to unlock it. But let's go ahead and try out the fingerprint scanner on the Cricut Icon 4. There we go, one more time. And there we go. So as you can see, the fingerprint scanner here worked real well, no issues at all. And again, both phones have Face Unlock too. Now taking a look at the camera setups here, there's really not a whole lot to see. Both phones have water drop notches for the front facing cameras. These cameras are 5 megapixels. Then on the back, both phones only have a single camera here. With the Cricut Icon 4, this camera is 13 megapixels. And with the TCL 30Z, this camera is 8 megapixels. In general, as far as features go, as you can see, again, there's really not a whole lot here. So if you're taking a lot of photos, you're definitely going to want to spend a little bit more money and get something a bit higher end that has a better camera setup. When it comes to the overall photo quality, again, really not too impressive here. Between the two, I would say the Cricut Icon 4 does take slightly better photos, but again, it's really not great. So if you're really taking a lot of photos, even if it's just for social media or something like that, I would definitely recommend getting something with a better camera. But if you're just taking a couple photos here and there, and you don't really care about the quality a whole lot, maybe you're just using Snapchat, for example, in that kind of situation, either phone will at least get the job done. But again, between the two, I would say the camera with the Cricut Icon 4 is just a tiny bit better. Now, as far as RAM and processor go, these phones are actually the exact same here, with both of them having 3GB of RAM and the MediaTek Helio A22 processor. So in general, as far as performance goes, number one, of course, since they have the same processor, you're really not going to see much of a performance difference between the two. And second of all, just keep in mind, these are really not fast phones. Sure, if you're doing the bare minimum, like texting, making calls, and some light web browsing and social media and stuff like that, they will at least get the job done. But if you're going to be on your phone a lot, then I would definitely recommend getting something a bit higher end. That being said, I did run Geekbench 5 benchmark tests on both phones, and here are the scores I got. So again, as you can see here, there's really not a huge difference. So when you're deciding between these two phones, I definitely wouldn't use this as a deciding factor. Now for the batteries, the Cricut Icon 4 has a 4000 mAh battery that supports 10W fast charging, and the TCL 30Z has a 3000 mAh battery, and I don't believe this phone actually supports fast charging. So in general, between the two, the Cricut Icon 4 having a significantly larger battery is going to get much better battery life and longevity. So if the battery is more of an important factor for you, then definitely keep this in mind. In addition to this, the Cricut Icon 4 is going to charge quite a bit faster. So in general, again, if the battery is really important to you, then I would definitely go with the Cricut Icon 4. Another thing I do want to point out here is that with the TCL 30Z, this phone does have a removable battery, and while honestly, in my opinion, this doesn't really affect things too much, it's definitely something to keep in mind. And in case you're wondering, let me show you how to access it. So on the phone, there's a tab right here. You're going to want to pop this. The back is going to come right off. And that's pretty much it. As you can see, here's the battery right here. And in this area, you can also access the SIM card and the microSD card. Another thing I do want to point out is that with the TCL 30Z, the battery really isn't terrible. I mean, for more basic daily use, if you're not really going to be using your phone all day, it is at least going to last. And when it comes to batteries, I have seen a lot worse. That being said though, again, between the two, if you really do care about the battery, the Cricket Icon 4 is definitely a much better choice here. In addition to this, as far as software goes, both phones do have Android 12, which is pretty good. We are technically on Android 13 now, but at this point, there are definitely quite a few phones that don't have Android 13 yet anyway. And considering these are really low-end phones, I'm definitely glad to see we have Android 12 here instead of Android 11. Something else to keep in mind here is that with the Cricket Icon 4, this phone does have NFC, whereas the TCL 30Z doesn't. So if you do like to use tap and pay, you will be able to do that with the Cricket Icon 4, but not with the TCL 30Z. But in conclusion, which of these phones is better? Now, on one hand, for the intended purpose of phones like these, you're really not going to go wrong with either. I mean, for really light use and basic activities, either phone is going to get the job done. And when it comes to things like the camera, for example, you're really not going to see a huge difference between the two. That being said though, I would choose the Cricket Icon 4 over the TCL 30Z for two different reasons. Number one, with the Cricket Icon 4, this phone again is significantly larger and it does have a slightly better form factor. And number two, the Cricket Icon 4 with a 4000 mAh battery versus a 3000 mAh battery does have much better battery life and longevity. So again, if the battery is important to you, definitely keep this in mind. And I guess a third reason why you might want the Cricket Icon 4 over the TCL 30Z is because again, this phone does have NFC, making it honestly the cheapest phone I know of that has this feature. So that's definitely a nice thing to see too. But that being said, again, keep in mind, these phones are really meant for super basic activities and really light use. And above all, they're both really affordable. So in general, if you do end up with the TCL 30Z, you're really not going to go wrong with this phone either. But this concludes my comparison between the Cricket Icon 4 and the TCL 30Z. Again, if you want to learn more about either phone individually, I will be linking to several other videos about them in the description, as well as some information about pricing, availability, and some of my favorite smartphone accessories. But that's it for this video. If you enjoyed it and found it useful, be sure to give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button. Don't forget to follow Kalipis Tech on Twitter and Instagram. And as always, I will see you in the next video.